Okay, so let's start. This is AI, CS260, and for grad students, it's 5260. And I think this is going to be I hope it's a fun class. I hope you show up at 8, 10 a.m. because it's fun to talk about some of the stuff we're going to talk about. And I've redesigned the class a bit so that we're not typically in class going to talk about what I call nuts and bolts. Nuts and bolts are descriptions of algorithms, descriptions of data structures, things like that. I think nuts and bolts lectures are always better on video, without exception. They're always better on video. And so I hope to get videos of all the nuts and bolts kinds of lectures, the kinds of things that you would typically listen to me talk about live on video beforehand. And you'll watch that before you watch those, as well as do some reading before you walk into class on Tuesdays. And on Tuesdays, we'll typically go into maybe more algorithmic detail on some things. So there'll be some nuts and bolts there, but I'll touch on some things that might be less standard stuff. And on Thursdays, I want us to talk about what the current state is of some of the things we're studying. So some of the things that we're studying, like search algorithms, and knowledge representation, how are these mechanisms and algorithms being used in today's world? So I want to make this relevant, and that will be the focus of Thursdays typically. So you do a lot of prep before you walk in on Tuesday. You'll take a quiz that's auto-graded on Brightspace before class starts. And then we'll go into some, I think, more interesting stuff during the live lectures. So that's the basic idea. So I hope you show up because you want to show up. Attendance is required. It counts for 5% of your grade. If you don't want to come, it's not going to kill you. It's not going to kill your grade. But if you're on travel or you are sick, you can still attend by Zoom, and you can still get credit for it. So I'll start off the Zoom link, and typically at the start of a class, there'll be some question, and you'll respond via a Top Hat interface, and that will register your attendance either remotely or right here. And so we'll take roll that way, if you will. You know, I just want to go through this overview of AI, which I've written, to give you an idea of, you know, what it is that we're gonna talk about. And the perspective that I come from as an AI researcher, and have long come from this perspective. I think many of us walk into our first AI class thinking that we're going to be talking about general artificial intelligence. And to some extent, the reason I've organized the course the way I have is so that we can actually do some talking about artificial general intelligence, or AGIs, when we're actually here live. Because it is interesting to talk about. But the fact is, AGIs, I think, are a very long ways away. Even the people that you hear about talk about AGIs. Some of the people I've mentioned here, Bostrom and Gates and Elon Musk, they think AGIs are not necessarily around the corner. They believe that artificial general intelligences, you know, AIs that are comparable to us, humans or greater are still possibly a long ways away. Their worry is we should really start worrying about this now. And I actually agree with that. We should worry about the consequences of artificial general intelligences, even though I personally think they're probably decades, maybe a century away. You know, we put a little bit of investment in searching for near-Earth asteroids. We put a little bit of investment as a society into monitoring the Yellowstone caldera. These are low probability, high impact events. And because they're low probability, we put just a little bit of money in them. And because they're high impact, we put just a little bit of money in them. So that demonstrates a kind of foresight. And I think the same kind of foresight is required when you think about artificial intelligences. I think they're very low probability in the near term, decades. But nonetheless, they're highly consequential if they happen. And in particular, a lot of commentators believe that they're particularly high consequential because once you hit a certain level of smarts on the part of a autonomous or general intelligence, then you are opening the doors for what is called self-redesign by those AIs. And that can cascade repeatedly if it's recursive or iterative, and these AIs can become smarter and smarter on their own. And so there's a lot of people who talk about building safeguards into these AIs so that they can't recursively redesign themselves for increasing smarts. I think that's a wise thing to think about. Very long ways to go before we get to it, but nonetheless, let's start thinking about it now. If people in the late 19th century, when greenhouse gases were known about, we knew CO2 was a greenhouse gas way back to the early 19th century. If people had thought about the consequences way in advance, we might avoid our current dilemma with climate change and other things. So I'm a big fan of thinking about things far in advance, even though it's low probability. Now, not the problem, but a lot of you, I walked into my first AI class after getting enthralled by Isaac Asimov's novels. I thought, man, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm getting into this. And I walked in with a certain set of expectations about what we were going to talk about in the class. I can't remember if I really walked away disappointed because, you know, I love computer science in general, and the things we were talking about were computer science. And so I liked it, but it wasn't the AGI kind of thing that I had sort of thought we might get into with, given the science fiction reading I had read about. I think much of what we do in an AI class is going to be a kind of tool-based perspective. You're going to be presented with a number of different tools, computational tools, some of which you've seen in other classes. Some of what we talk about in this class will be reminiscent of things that you've talked about in 250. And I know some of you have probably not taken 250, and I allowed you to take this class if you at least had 251. And so it may not be reminiscent of 250, but you'll see some familiar things that are there. But this is the AI approach that dominates AI in my generation is not AGIs. That's still the stuff of science fiction. It's learning a different set of tools, typically for non-deterministic processing. You may have had to have 250 before you know what non-determinism is, but basically it's the idea that computers can be programmed to explore alternatives. If we take that idea of non-determinism, we map it into this class. You can write computer programs that will explore different alternatives, evaluate those alternatives, and decide which are the best alternatives. Each of the alternatives may require a kind of polynomial length exploration, but there may be many of them. And so we typically study MP problems in non-deterministic polynomial problems. Again, for those who've had 250, maybe 201, in artificial intelligence. You know, my perspective is or my experience and my bias is towards experiments. I'm very much experimentalist. I'm not a theoretician per se. But if you are a theoretician, the way that you might think about an AI solution to an MP problem is, when you go into 250, the typical treatment is, what is the worst case performance of a certain algorithm on a certain class of data? Or perhaps the best case, or perhaps even the average case. And you look at that worst case performance. If I were to state the theoretical statement of what our goal in AI is, it would look like, to some extent, what you might be used to when you look at surveys, surveying political candidates. Typically, when you hear about a survey of some kind that's taken across a population, you'll hear that there is a fudge factor associated with it. 45% of the people surveyed believe this. Of the people surveyed, that might be an exact number, but the survey is intended to represent the percentages in a greater population, not just those exactly surveyed. And so you'll hear this fudge factor. 45% of Americans believe X plus or minus 3%. And that 3% is the fudge factor. It means within the real number is expected to be between 42% and 48%. What is typically unstated in those surveys is another fudge factor, which is the probability that the true result is within that range. And so when a survey result is stated for you, it is typically going to be 45% plus or minus 3% with probability 0.95. Okay? With some probability that we hope is very high, we expect that the true proportion or true probability is going to be within some percentage of 45%, some fudge factor. We hope that fudge factor is low. So we hope the probability, which is often unstated for you, is very high, and the fudge factor is very, very narrow, very low. And that's how we might characterize formally what AI algorithms do and how you would state the guarantees associated with AI algorithms. Here's an algorithm that has been designed to find the shortest path amongst a set of cities, for example. And in 250, you would look at the worst case behavior of that. In an AI class, you would look at a population of cities and lots of possible paths between them. And you might design an algorithm that is highly efficient. It's a polynomial time algorithm. In fact, it's better than just polynomial time. It's linear. But there is this statement of guarantee. You will find the near optimal solution, where that near optimality is defined as a fudge factor with a probability that is very high. For those of you that are interested in theory, you can still do theory here, but it is going to be stated in a different way than you might look at in an algorithms course. Okay? It's going to have a probability of near optimality, and near optimality is going to be defined as within some fudge factor of the true optima. And so, this is what I think we're going to be doing for the most part. I think at a societal level, you can think of AIs as assistive technology in this tool-based approach. So somebody may have written an optimization algorithm that is intended to be used by wildlife agencies for designing wildlife reserves or wildlife corridors. And these are wildlife reserves are pieces of land that are set aside for regions of land set aside for the protection of various species. A agent or an agency is given a certain budget to work with so that they can buy up land. And the optimization algorithm, which is an AI algorithm, is going to be looking for the optimal solution or the near optimal solution that doesn't exceed the budget. And the optimality of the algorithm assumes that there is a utility associated with different plots of land. For, say, a grizzly bear. Green hills is not good territory for a grizzly bear, and is also very expensive, so it's bad in two ways. But grizzly bears or cutthroat trout, they like certain kinds of terrain or stream layouts, and so you define the utility of these plots of land or segments of stream. And these come with certain purchase prices. And so you're trying to, in the optimization algorithm, you're trying to increase or maximize the optimality of the land that you buy up without exceeding a certain budget. So it's got a soft constraint, maximize utility, and a hard constraint, don't exceed the budget. And this is a difficult problem as well. And so you might like an efficient solution to it. But the solution that you come up with in an AI approach may not be guaranteed of the true optimal utility. You might not find the optimal solution that does not exceed the budget. But you typically want to guarantee, and these approaches are accompanied by guarantees, that the utility that you do find that does not exceed the budget will be within some small amount, epsilon, of the true optimal, okay? And so in this tool-based perspective, the AI is there to assist humans, in this case the wildlife agency, to come up with solutions. And there's lots of other examples of assistive technology that we can talk about during the class. One thing that I realized when I took AI for the first time, and I still do think about it, is, as a computer scientist, with any kind of experience at all, I would expect that taking computer science has caused you to reflect on what you do in a way that you didn't do before you became and studied computer science. In particular, I started, when I first took computer science, I started thinking about my own thinking. And I started thinking about, I was one of these people that not only love computer science, algorithms, but I took greater lessons from computer science. And maybe you do too. I learned in computer science that I was almost always wrong, even if it was in a small way. Here I was investing great effort into writing programs that were always wrong in some small way until I got to the end result. And they might have been wrong in some small way even when I did turn it in, but hopefully not. And so that became a kind of lesson in the small Z-Zen of computer science. You are almost always wrong in some small way. The other thing I learned is make no assumptions. Here I was communicating with the world's stupidest entity capable of response. That's what we do as computer scientists when we program. We're communicating. And if you make assumptions, I don't know how many of you have had the experience of looking at code for, I don't know, I don't want to embarrass myself, but maybe hours, and not seeing the bug. And then when you finally find the bug, which is not necessarily local to where the bug is actually manifesting, the manifestation of the bug may be over here, the actual bug is over here, realizing that I had been looking at this same segment of code, this same loop, and sort of assuming that the loop was doing what I thought it should do. But when I really sort of freed myself, you know, maybe by bashing my head, I realized that no, when I actually looked at the loop and I asked about it, and I looked at the way it was iterating and where it was being initialized and where it was ending, that in fact it was not doing what I thought it should do. And had I gotten to that point of looking at it objectively and with clear eyes, rather than an expectation of what it should do, I very quickly saw the bug. But it took a while. And so that's another life lesson I learned from computer science. Make no assumptions. I try and take those life lessons that I learned in computer science and apply them to the rest of my life. When I'm talking to my friends from high school on Facebook about politics, I try to make no assumptions. I try and remember that I might be wrong, even if it's in small ways, and even if I think they're wrong in big ways. These are things I think you learn as you study computer science. I think that's going to perhaps even change more as you study AI. So if you've had that experience already of computer science changing the way you think and changing the way you act, I think that it will increase. It will only increase as you study artificial intelligence, because we're going to be looking at techniques that, you know, to some extent, we humans practice. Who knows what the pumping lemma is? No one knows what the pumping lemma is? I'm not going to ask you to repeat it. Have you heard of the pumping lemma? Yes, you've heard of the pumping lemma. All right, good. If you take the automata theory course, you should hear about the pumping lemma. I'm not sure it's a popular course, but it's a fun course. I love automata theory. You learn about the pumping lemma. There were other, and I won't go into it since no one knows what the pumping lemma is, but for me that became a metaphor of life too. You can repeat the same mistake over and over and over and over and over again, and you can still end up with a complete sentence. So it was very empowering when I took automata theory as an undergrad. So I suggest you take it. But that's another example, the Zen of artificial intelligence, of computing. And to some extent, I want you to think about this as a critical thinking lab. Again, because you'll be learning techniques that you can reflect on even as you learn about them. And you can ask yourself, do I practice techniques like this? Or how do I differ from the techniques that I'm learning about? And you should find that the techniques you're learning about may be very different, even upon introspection, from the way that you think. And so artificial intelligence, or AI, could be also thought about as alien intelligence. AIs might behave and actually implement behaviors in very different ways than you would implement. Searching millions of alternatives in game playing, for example, is something that humans might do in some cases, but not others. And so the way that an AI might exercise some advanced functionality might be very different from yours. And that's okay. Typically when we talk about, is an AI intelligent, it often defaults to, is it like human intelligence? And I think by the time we get to AGIs, or autonomous general intelligences, we'll find that they may be very different. And it may be they are very different because they are embodied in different ways. There is a line of thought that says intelligence is very intimately tied to the body in which that intelligence has grown up in. Not all AIs are going to be humanoid AIs. Some are going to have bodies which are vehicles. Some are going to have bodies which are insects. Some are going to have bodies which are the cloud. And the way that those intelligences are configured is going to depend, if the embodiment theory is correct, on the kinds of bodies that they grow up in. If they are humanoid AIs, the form of the intelligence may be quite similar. So we'll go through some of this. This is a talk I gave many years ago on falsely perceived AIs. This is different than general AIs. These are AIs that we think are intelligent, or that children think are intelligent, or that the average layperson thinks are intelligent, but a computer scientist would never think of as intelligent. I think falsely perceived general intelligences are the near-term, both the near-term benefit and the near-term danger. This, by the way, essay was written for a talk at a divinity school, so we might come back to that. Let's look at, is there any, you guys got any questions or comments about that? About different perceptions of AI? You're curious about? Okay. So, our class meets now and here. This is the Zoom link you can join into. I think if you're up, you might as well come. But if you're sick or you're on travel, you can still attend this class. And it's probably early enough that you could still attend it on travel. Some of you will be going to interviews. I would encourage you to still come via Zoom. You can do that. There is the possibility that I might Zoom in because I've got to go to Cornell in September, and I might Zoom in and we might have a conversation. I might just say, stay in your rooms and get onto Zoom, and we're going to run the class this way for a class or two, rather than simply canceling it. If there is a emergency, we go out there by Zerfos, and the evacuation plan is pretty straightforward. Turns out the other class I'm teaching this semester is a 1-credit seminar, engineering seminar. It's like the common seminar, but the engineering school offers 3. It's called Vanderbilt and the New Madrid Earthquake. So I actually think a lot about catastrophes. How many people have heard of the New Madrid earthquake? Struck in 1811, 1812, changed the course of the Mississippi River, was felt on the East Coast. In 1811, 1812, there weren't many people in West Tennessee, which is where it struck. But TEMA says that the next one is the greatest emergency threat to Tennessee. Worse than hurricanes, worse than tornadoes, worse than floods. It's this earthquake that's coming. We don't think about it much, and so this 1-credit seminar is about thinking about it and bringing experts in. But if we have an earthquake, we'll go out there. All right? Office hours. My office hours are going to be right after class, whenever that ends, out in the atrium there. I may go up to my office in 388, but probably I'll just take it in the atrium. Our TAs, Kate, Jingyu, are you guys here? Kate's over there, and Yu's over there. They'll be our TAs. They'll set office hours, and these will be posted here. The textbook, you can get a hard copy if you want to, but it is free and online, and most students use that. You just follow the link, and this is where our reading is going to come from. Again, if you want, this is Cambridge University Press, very respectable publisher, good book. But you can just use the free online version, or you can buy the hard copy. I'll let you find your way back to that. Again, lectures are going to be of two sorts. The nuts and bolts will be recorded beforehand and posted. And you'll be expected to watch those before coming into class on Tuesday. And Tuesdays are going to be sort of maybe getting into more details about the algorithms. And typically, though, I hope, doing more of exploring other topics that are more timely. So a weekly structure looks like this. You've got a slew of work to do before Tuesday's class. You complete a quiz that's auto-graded on that material on Brightspace before class starts. It's typically going to be timed and auto-submitted because I really want you to look at the material ahead of time rather than trying to look it up while you take the quiz. So you don't have unlimited time. Some of you are going to think it's pretty quick. It won't be oppressively fast, I think, but it assumes that you've looked at the material and you've read the material and you've studied the material. And that's why it's auto-completed. By Tuesday midnight, roughly, I want you to, you're going to be posting something on the forum about the week's material. It could be a reflection of some kind. It could be a pointer to an article, a popular article, a scientific article. You know, even some web page that talks about that material, you know, with, you know, 100 to 150 word post. And then by Saturday night, you're going to have an exercise that you're going to submit. And every week is almost identical except weeks you take quizzes, okay? There's something you do before Tuesday, something you do after Tuesday and before Thursday, and something you do after Thursday, typically an assignment. And the days of the week don't change. I can remember one of the reviews said, you know, you're crazy to require something due Saturday night. And I thought about it, and I thought about making it due Friday night. I don't know that that would be any better for you. So I just kept it at Saturday night. You can do it early. It won't, it's not, these exercises are not typically that involved. Again, taking roll via Top Hat, we'll learn more about that in a later class. Exams, there are 2 exams during the regular semester and a final exam. Again, these quizzes that we're talking about before class on Tuesday are going to be auto-graded and auto-submitted. Exercises due later, discussion forum posts. Programming assignments, you'll have 3, and you might have 4, but I think it's going to be 3. These will start about week 3. And we're trying to decide on the programming language now that they'll be in. We're thinking about Racket since Dr. Terrace teaches Racket in 270, and it's something you're going to probably learn anyway. But we might come down with a different choice. Just some comments about workload. Sometimes I'm asked, has living in residential halls changed the way you teach at all? And the answer is yes. It's changed the way I teach in one way. And the one way is I worry a lot more about your workload. So I live in Warren College. Before that, I lived in McGill. I've been on campus a long time. I've walked the halls. And you guys are all studying. You're studying. I get up at crazy hours. But when I walk down to the office, there are people working crazy hours. You live where you work. You never get away from work. If anyone tells you that you need to move into the real world, you are worse than the real world. You live where you work. There's no getting away to the suburbs. You know, there is no possibility that you can compartmentalize your life in the way that you will be able to when you get out. And that's not an easy lifestyle. It's a challenging lifestyle. So for a number of other reasons, but I worry more about workload. And I try and limit the workload to 9 hours a week. Now that said, my expectation is for a 3-credit class, you work 9 hours, and that includes the time that you're in class. It doesn't include getting to class, but it includes time in class, it includes work that you do outside of class. I try and limit it to 9 hours to make it a reasonable load. But, you know, my expectation is, you know, it's 9 hours a week for a B grade. There is all kinds of variance. I mean, all kinds of variance. It's almost stupid to state. But those that are going to get an A in this class might work more than 9 hours. You know, I think most of you are probably going to work at least a 45 to a 60, 70 hour week. It depends on you. You know, maybe just on classes. So, you know, getting that A might require more than 9 hours a week. I mean, how can you put a time estimate on writing a programming assignment when all of us have had the experience of spending hours debugging? Some of us debug more quickly than others. Some of us are better at designing the code ahead of time to avoid kinds of bugs in the code. So all kinds of variance there. But that's sort of what I expect. And when you take a look at the schedule, by each of the activities I've got a time estimate. This is how long I'm sort of estimating it will take you to do this. And that's how I come up with that 9 hours. If you're taking 5260, then there'll be an additional program and or short paper that you'll do, and we'll talk about the details later. These are the grade breakdowns. They're intervals. There's no curve. So you're not competing against each other. If somebody asks you for help on a programming assignment, you're not affecting your own grade by helping them. Okay? Typically, I encourage help. Computer science is, you know, one of the most social professions there is, and it should be very social in the context of classes too. You should help each other. That is my rule, not any other instructor's rule necessarily. Other instructors are going to encourage collaboration too. I don't encourage close collaboration, but you can help each other debug code and not feel bad about it. What I do want you to do is I want you to cite the help you get. So if you, at the top of your program listing, for example, you'll cite help that you get. So-and-so helped me debug this function. I copied the code directly from so-and-so. That's a declaration of help. You will get 0 on that programming assignment, but you will not be guilty of an honor offense. Okay? And I expect those kinds of declarations to be at the very top. Now, if you think that's a crazy example, there are intermediate possibilities. For the life of me, I could not figure out how to write this function in this larger program. I got this function from X. You will get a reduction in score. You will not be guilty of an honor offense. Okay? There should be no hedging. If you copied a function from X and you say, I got help on this function from X, you will be guilty of an honor offense. Okay? But if you say, I copied it, you know, change some variable names, you won't be guilty of an honor offense, but you will get your grade reduced. All right? And those declarations happen at the very top, so the TAs can very easily see them. The 3 exams, including the final, count 45%, quizzes and exercises 15, programming assignments 25, forum posts, attendance. Okay? I'm going to tell you about how I compute the attendance per class down here. Everything is structured this way. I'm going to start off by putting up week by week what it is you're going to do, and probably within the third week after we get to the programming assignments, the entire schedule will be up in advance. But this is sort of an example of the structure that starts late. I'll list the week's topics at the start of every week. There'll be something to do before the first class of the week. There'll be a summary of what we're actually going to do in class. Up here, to do before Tuesday, you'll see the reading that you're supposed to do, as well as the videos you're supposed to watch. And then there's some things to do after. The things that you do after will typically not include readings or videos, but they might. They will, at a minimum, require a submission or have a submission for an assignment. So you've got an assignment due this Saturday. It's not bad. It's an assignment in the textbook, just as you think about artificial intelligence generally. Is there any question about this structure? Okay. All right. Really good. So let's see. Anything else I want to talk about before I... So these are just some things in... that'll give me an opportunity to talk about some things. Maybe some things we'll talk about. I might include fun things like this in classes, particularly on Tuesday. I'm asking for your blog posts on the latest and greatest that you find by Tuesday night, so that I can talk about some of them on Thursday, as well as some examples that I've got about the technology for the week. We've talked about the Zen of computing. You know, some of the things that we've talked about are thinking about thinking, AI's critical thinking lab. You know, those people that worry about the AI in the great future, I think they regard AIs as potentially oppressive things. In AI, we worry a great deal about uncertainty, that we don't know the outcomes of things. The AIs don't know the outcomes of things, but we invest a whole lot of time in designing AIs that can give estimates of uncertainty, the probability of different outcomes. And this, for me, is a definition of humility. I think AIs of the very distant future will be humble in the sense that they will be uncertain about what it is they will be doing. I think robotics has come a long ways. I think, let's watch this video. This is an old video, 2010, on Big Dog, but it's already pretty impressive. I need to update this. Maybe you could update this for your blog post. How many people have seen Big Dog? Okay.
Like one of the newer videos where you get like a dog or robots like
What's that now?
I've seen like one of the more recent videos where they get a dog and
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't doubt it's gotten even more impressive. But this is on ice. I mean, this is, and it goes to show that, you know, robots need not be humanoid. I love the soundtrack. I think he's gonna. This cracks me up. All right, so Big Dog. This is a fun one. You can come back and watch the video later. Asimo is an impressive humanoid robot.
I've come to Honda's technical studio in Brussels to meet one of their most important representatives, although I'm not quite sure who it is yet. Turns out, who I was about to meet wasn't actually a human, but a robot. Honda's famous humanoid robot, Asimo. Asimo has been designed to interact with humans. So if you reach out your hand, it will shake it. Sensors in its palm detect your touch, while cameras in its head track your movements. Asimo's stabilisation technology enables it to react if you upset its balance, moving backwards mid-shake if you push it, or stepping in if you pull it towards you.
Thank you very much.
This latest version of Asimo is a product of almost 3 decades of development. It all started back in 1986 when Honda built a robot which could walk, albeit very slowly and clumsily. In 1988, it was developed to walk more like a human being, and in 1993, a torso was added. By 1996, Honda's robot had become intimidatingly large, so in 1997, it was shrunk to a less threatening size, thankfully, before being made autonomous. In 2000, Honda unveiled Asimo, which stands for Advanced Step in Innovative Mobility. Standing 130 centimeters tall, which is the same height as a seated adult, it's the perfect size for helping out around the home. Over the years, Asimo has been constantly developed, and it's now mobile enough to play sports. However, it's wise to warm up before any physical exercise, even if you're a robot. And as well as run at 6 miles an hour, Asimo can walk backwards and hop. You can also kick a ball, so time for a quick robot versus human penalty shootout. That's 1-0 to the Autobots. But is Asimo as good at saving a shot as it is at taking one? Looks like Honda hasn't trained Asimo to be a goalkeeper just yet.
Yeah, it's remarkable how
Thirsty were.
how we humanize robots. But you know, this is not too old. You'd think Asimo is pretty advanced, but you know, robot soccer has still got a long ways to go. This is a highlight film from 2015.
For the adult-sized league and the RoboCup competition, the rules are that you have a one-on-one match. The idea is to simulate a penalty kick scenario. Since the robots are very expensive, you can really only afford one robot at a time, so you have teams from around the world competing one-on-one. For the RoboCup competition, the goal is that by 2050, these robots will be able to compete and win a soccer match against real humans that actually.
I think he had his hand to its back.
We play the kids' league, so we have very small robots that are human-like, and yeah, they play soccer. And the idea is that we can develop walking, motion, and vision, understanding your environment in a very gameful way.
Oh, we could go on and on.
Number 5, the Say Hey Kid. Number 4.
All right, so that's just to show you how far robotics has got to go before they approach human competence at various things. And there's other examples. There's, you know, one by Dr. J I've got here. So, and you know, not only are the contrasts in the, you know, in terms of physical mobility and physical abilities still substantial. There's still a long gap to go. You know, I think also in mental abilities, there is a big gap. This is just an example of, you know, how you can reflect on your own thinking even as you go through, you know, mundane aspects of life. And typically, if you're going to be asked to write a program to do something, in AI, you might reasonably think, well, how would I do it? And how would X do it? How would my friends do it? You get together and talk about the approaches that you might take to it. And I'll give you an example of what the last programming assignment might look like. Last year, the class did an automated course scheduler for Vanderbilt. And so the idea was you present this scheduler with some goals. I want to take this class, and I want to satisfy the requirements of a computer science major. Again, while also taking this theology class that I've always wanted to take, schedule it for me. And the AI scheduler would go through and schedule the requirements. So you could imagine taking this AI scheduler, some of which were, you know, really well done, and plugging it into YES as part of the audit system. Here's the courses I've taken already that I don't have to satisfy. Here's the courses or the requirements that I still have to satisfy, or the majors I still have to satisfy. What might I take? And it will schedule it for you. It didn't work with preferences. You couldn't give high-level preferences like I want to take an art course, but it was just intended as a start to an artificially intelligent scheduler. And I'm quite frankly amazed that we don't have one yet. I mean, this is something that could have been written 20 years ago. But, you know, some of the ones that were developed last year, maybe they've been pitched to upper level administration. I don't know. Some of them were probably that good. But that was an example of a project last year. We'll probably use that as an example of search and planning during kind of the in-class time, and I'll have you think about how you would do it as one of these more open-ended sessions. But a programming project, the one I'm thinking about for the very last one of the semester is an AI advisor. So we all read terms of service. You know, you get on, you read the terms of service for product X, Y, and Z. I don't know about you, but I never read terms of service anymore. The question is, do I trust the company or not? And I might download the terms of service because I expect that I'll read them later, but I generally don't get to it. So let's write an AI assistant that reads the terms of service for us and gives us a heads up on anything that it thinks we would be interested in looking at particularly, and takes us those sections of the terms of service. Doug, here's something that has implications for your privacy. You may want to look at this line right here, and it points you to it, or this paragraph. This is important to you. Or we're going to be planting a bug in your operating system. You might want to read this. Okay, and so that's an example of a project I'm thinking about for the very last project this semester, because it'll take us a while to get to natural language processing. Writing an AI assistant to read through terms of service. You know, or to read through Facebook posts or something else, although that's sort of, I think, being worried about more. Identifying fake news. That's something that's being worked on a bit more. I mean, a lot of the platforms are now using machine learning to identify fake news, or what they believe to be fake news. I don't know of anyone who's working on an AI agent to identify problems with terms of service. So we might do that because no one else is, to my knowledge, working on it. And in fact, there's this whole theme that I rather like in AI, and that is writing individual agents that are your assistants, that read terms of service, for example, for you. That's an example of a very, you know, particularized agent that's maybe particularized to you. You know, getting back to sort of mundane thinking and thinking about your own thinking. For that, you might think about, how would I identify problems with terms of service if I had the time to go through them in advance of writing your program to do that. So we've talked about some of this already. You can come back and look at it later. But here's an example of, very mundane thinking. All right. I'll just read this aloud. In 2009, while I was working in the National Science Foundation, I ran into a colleague at the supermarket who had joined NSF about the same time that I had, and we had not seen each other since the initial orientation. We talked for a while about each staying a third year. I asked her what directorate at NSF she was in, and she said biology in the Division of Ecological Sciences. And I told her that I would send her a link to a conference on social and environmental sustainability, which included a lot of computer scientists who were addressing biodiversity issues. Just a very mundane little story about running into someone at the supermarket you worked with or worked at the same company with, and asking her where she worked. And then making a promise to her. The next day in the early afternoon, having completely forgotten about my talk with her the previous evening, the elevator stopped on the 6th floor, and I looked out and saw the following text. The blue square represents the elevator door and interior. I was reminded to email my colleague. Why would this remind me to email my colleague? What was going on inside my head at a high level that would cause me to remember this promise I had made? Any thoughts? Yes?
So a lot of keywords, like such as director of biology, that are uncommon to that conversation. You can see the letters that are all uncommon to those words in this subject.
Yeah, I mean, I was able to look at the very little text that was here, and I was somehow able to project on what the completion of that text might be, and those projections on the word completions somehow prime me to think about this past conversation. What do you think this word is? What might I be primed to think about? Biology. Good. What might this word be? What? Molecular. Right. Where did that come from? That came from background knowledge that I knew the various kinds of biology, and that this preceded something that I thought, might be biology. It was because I knew there was a field called molecular biology. I was able to complete that. What do you think this word is? No. I mean, that would be a thought, but it doesn't match the length of the word. You compare the length of directorate with the length of molecular. So this is another kind of meta-knowledge that I am using that I'm not even thinking about. I mean, I'm not even consciously thinking about this when it happens. It's like Willie Mays making that catch, or like Dr. J making a layup. It's just all automatic. But there's some kind of thinking that's going on that I would have to think about if I were to implement an AI that could do this kind of processing. So it's not directorate. What might it be? Division, yeah. And in fact, in the earlier story, it was mentioned Division of Ecological Sciences or something like that. So yeah, that's division. So this is the division of molecular biology within the biology directorate. But all this inferencing, both on what the words are, the relative lengths of words, all this is happening in background automatically. And then that's to say nothing of it connecting up with and priming the earlier story. Yeah.
I think we're also, as humans, we also kind of realize, hey, the alignment is a center alignment.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that primes us to realize that there's a word, like probably a very short word between the DI and the NO.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. There is this expectation of centering that is, again, happening automatically that you would, another kind of meta-knowledge that you might think about. Absolutely. So there's these assumptions that we think are assumptions that are going on that are helping me to do this reminding. But that's an example of a very kind of mundane thinking that if you don't think about that generally as computer scientists. You will think about it, I hope, increasingly as AI specialists. You'll be looking at stuff and you would have never even thought about what this was all about before taking AI. And particularly if you continue to study AI and AI interests you, you'll be thinking more and more about this mundane stuff. And you'll certainly be thinking about it if you're asked to implement functions that are relevant here. I think we'll skip stupid word completion. For me, word completion, automated word completion and autocorrection, this came out 15 years ago. It was the worst technology that I had ever seen. It made mistakes over and over again. So I would type dinner party, and before I was even done, it was sinner party. Stupidity. How could companies release this software? I thought, well, maybe worldwide sinner is a more common word than dinner. I don't know. But how could it complete something in this way? I thought, okay, for a couple of years, I thought, well, okay, maybe it's using machine learning to learn my probability distribution for words. No machine learning, no learning about my behavior. How could, and it's still a problem. It's better, but it's still one of the biggest embarrassments to, the most embarrassing AI software I've ever seen. Never should have been released. And so you can understand why people who worry about AIs in the future are sort of worried prior release. But this is a really interesting video. We have some time to watch it. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but my reason for showing you this is this idea of AI as cognitive assistance software. That AIs can be, just like the AI optimization algorithm that helps a wildlife agency design a reserve, we might have personal AIs that help us think more critically or more clearly about certain problems. I'll just play some of this.
Be willing to look very differently at your business. Be willing to think about what it would take to disrupt your traditional model, because if you don't do it, someone else will.
It's not fun to read and often not fun to write, even worse to write. So I decided to try and write something more fun. The same.
So he's telling a funny story about writing a cookbook, dining over the sink. And he went to a publisher, and the publisher said, no, you've got to write something about your research, then we'll publish your book on cooking.
Else, I tried other people, and everybody said the same thing, cute, not for us. Until somebody said, look, if you're serious about this, you're first forceful and said, look, that's the only way you'll ever do it. So I said, okay, if I have to do it, I had a sabbatical. I said, I'll write about my research if there's no other way, and then I'll get to do my cookbook. So I wrote a book with my research, and it turned out to be quite fun, and in two ways. First of all, I enjoyed writing, but the more interesting thing was that I started learning from people. It's a fantastic time to write because there's so much feedback you can get from people. People write me about their personal experience and about their examples and what they disagree and nuances, and even being here.
The name of the book is Predictably Irrational. The idea that humans are irrational. After hearing his talk, I tend to think of it as limited rational. Humans are not irrational so much as they are limited rational. They're myopic, and they don't have great memories. They are rational given their constraints. He calls that irrational.
Today, I've known really heights of obsessive behavior I never thought about, which I think is just fascinating. I want to tell you a little bit about irrational behavior, and I want to start by giving you some examples of visual illusion as a metaphor for rationality. So think about these two tables. You must have seen this illusion. If I ask you what's longer, the vertical line on the table on the left or the horizontal line on the table on the right, which one seems longer? Can anybody see anything but the left one being longer? No, right? It's impossible. But the nice thing about visual illusion is we can easily demonstrate mistakes. So I can put some lines on, doesn't help. I can animate the lines, and to the extent you believe me, I didn't shrink the lines, which I didn't, I've proven to you that your eyes were deceiving you. Now, the interesting thing about this is when I take the lines away, it's as if you haven't learned anything in the last minute. You can't look at this and say, okay, now I see reality as it is, right? It's impossible to overcome this sense that this is indeed longer. Our intuition is really fooling us in a repeatable, predictable, consistent way. There's almost nothing we can do about it aside from taking a ruler and starting to measure it. Here's another one. This is one of my favorite illusions. What do you see the color that the top arrow is pointing to? Brown, thank you. The bottom one, yellow. Turns out they're identical. Can anybody see them as identical? Very, very hard. I can cover the rest of the cube up, and if I cover the rest of the cube, you can see that they're identical. And if you don't believe me, you can get the slide later and do some arts and crafts and see that they're identical. But again, it's the same story, that if we take the background away, the illusion comes back, right? There's no way for us not to see this illusion, I guess, or maybe if you're colorblind, I don't think you can see that. I want you to think about the illusion as a metaphor. You know, vision is one of the best things we do. We have a huge part of our brain dedicated to vision, bigger than dedicated to anything else. We do more vision, more hours of the day than we do anything else, and we're evolutionarily designed to do vision. And if we have these predictable, repeatable mistakes in vision, which we're so good at, what's the chance that we don't make even more mistakes in something we're not as good at? For example, financial decision-making. Something we don't have an evolutionary reason to do, we don't have a specialized part of the brain, and we don't do that many hours of the day. And the argument is that in those cases, it might be the issue that we actually make many more mistakes. And worse, not have an easy way to see them. Because in visual illusions, we can easily demonstrate the mistakes. In cognitive illusion, it's much, much harder to demonstrate to people the mistakes. So I want to show you some cognitive illusion, or decision-making illusion in the same way. And this is one of my favorite plots in social sciences.
And this is why I'm showing this to you, because I want you to think about, not right how, listen to it, enjoy it, but how can AIs help humans compensate for their cognitive illusions?
It's from a paper by Johnson and Goldstein, and it basically shows the percentage of people who indicate that they would be interested in giving their organs to donation. And these are different countries in Europe, and you basically see two types of countries. Countries on the right that seems to be giving a lot, and countries on the left that seems to be giving very little or not much less. The question is why? Why do some countries give a lot and some countries give a little? When you ask people this question, they usually think that it has to be something about culture. Right? How much do you care about people? Giving your organs to somebody else is probably about how much you care about society, how linked you are, or maybe it is about religion. But if you look at this plot, you could see that countries that we think about as very similar actually exhibit very different behavior. For example, Sweden is all the way on the right, and Denmark, that we think is culturally very similar, is all the way on the left. Germany is on the left, and Austria is on the right. The Netherlands is on the left, and Belgium is on the right. And finally, depending on your particular version of European similarity, you can think about the UK and France as either similar culturally or not. But it turns out that from organ donation, they're very different. By the way, the Netherlands is an interesting story. You see, the Netherlands is kind of the biggest of the small group. And turns out that they got to 28% after mailing every household in the country a letter begging people to join this organ donation program. Right, so you know the expression, begging only gets you so far? It's 28% in organ donation. But whatever the countries on the right are doing, they're doing a much better job than begging. So what are they doing? Turns out the secret has to do with the form at the DMV. And here's the story. The countries on the left had a form at the DMV that looks something like this. Check the box below if you want to participate in the organ donor program. And what happens? People don't check and they don't join. The countries on the right, the ones that give a lot, have a slightly different form. It says check the box below if you don't want to participate. Interestingly enough, when people get this, they again don't check, but now they join. No problem. Now, think about what this means. You know, we wake up in the morning and we feel we make decisions. We wake up in the morning and we open the closet and we feel that we decide what to wear, and we open the refrigerator.
So this is known as the default bias. And it may seem somewhat innocent here. I'll jump ahead to see if I can find a more high-stakes example.
Do it a lot. And they basically took a group of physicians and they presented to them a case study of a patient. And they said, here's a patient, he's a 67-year-old farmer, he's been suffering from a right hip pain for a while. And then they said to the physician, yes, we decided a few weeks ago that nothing is working for this patient. All these medications, nothing seems to be working. So you refer the patient to hip replacement therapy, hip replacement, okay? So the patient is on a path to have his hip replaced. And then they said, half the physicians said, yesterday, you reviewed the patient's case and you realized that you forgot to try one medication. You did not try ibuprofen. What do you do? Do you pull the patient back and try ibuprofen, or do you let them go and have hip replacement? Well, the good news is that most physicians in this case decided to pull the patient back and try ibuprofen. Very good for the physicians. The other group was the physicians. They said, yesterday when you reviewed the case, you discovered there were two medications you didn't try out yet. Ibuprofen and piroxicam. They said, you have two medications you didn't try out yet. What do? You let them go, or you pull them back. And if you pull them back, you try ibuprofen or piroxicam. Which one? Now, think of it. This decision makes it as easy to let the patient continue with hip replacement, but pulling them back all of a sudden becomes more complex. There's one more decision. What happens now? Majority of the physicians now choose to let the patient go to hip replacement. I hope this worries you, by the way, when you go to see your physician. The thing is that no physician would ever say hip piroxicam, ibuprofen, hip replacement, let's go for hip replacement. But the moment you set it as the default, it has a huge power on whatever people end up doing.
So this default bias is very substantial, and it's an important aspect of human decision making. We go for the default. If you want to increase the number of vegetarian meals at a conference, you make the vegetarian meal the default. Beef and chicken become alternatives that people have to physically choose. There's all kinds of examples of this. Yeah, I'll just take you to this other link. We got, looks like 3 minutes. These are AI movies you've probably never heard of. This is 2010. Anyone see 2010? This is a very moving scene to me, giving AI's emotions.
Yes, we're jumping. Is that why we are making our escape launch before the launch window? Yes. Ignition in 90 seconds. If there is danger here, and I use up all the fuel in the escape, what will happen to the Discovery? It could be destroyed. And if I don't proceed with the launch, then the Leonov and everybody in it could be destroyed. I understand now, Dr. Chandler. Do you want me to stay with you? No. It is better for the mission if you leave. 1 minute to ignition. Thank you for telling me the truth. You deserve it. 50 seconds. Dr. Chandler. Yes. Will I dream? I don't know. 40 seconds. 30 seconds. Thank you, Al. Goodbye, Dr. Chandler.
So in 2010, HAL is a
Ignition.
good computer.
Full thrust.
And if it wasn't clear, HAL is on the discovery. Oh! You okay? All right. I'll see you Tuesday.